At 0952 hours on January 22, 1935, test pilot Capitaine de Corvette Bonneau stood on the bridge of Le Terrible and watched the speed indicator climb past 44 knots. The destroyer was conducting sea trials in the Mediterranean off Toulon. 4 water tube boilers fed steam to 2 Rateau Bretagne turbines, generating 90,868 shaft horsepower. The propellers were 3.8 meters in diameter. Each blade was precisely machined to tolerances measured in tenths of millimeters. The hull was 132.4 meters of welded steel designed to cut through waves rather than ride them. At 0954 hours, the indicator reached 45 knots. It held for 1 hour. Le Terrible maintained 45.02 knots, 83.38 kilometers per hour, 51.81 miles per hour. This was the fastest a conventionally hulled warship had ever traveled. The record would stand for 72 years. The British Admiralty received the trial results with disbelief. 45 knots was impossible. Destroyers did not exceed 38 knots. The fastest British destroyer, HMS Cossack of the Tribal class, achieved 36.5 knots under ideal conditions. The Italians claimed their Navigatori class could reach 42 knots, but actual service speeds were closer to 38. The Americans planned destroyers capable of 37 knots, but none had been built yet. 45 knots was fantasy. The French were lying, or the trials were rigged. The Admiralty sent observers to verify. The observers returned convinced. Le Terrible was fast. Her 5 sisters were equally fast. Le Fantasque achieved 42.71 knots. L'Audacieux achieved 43.5 knots. Le Malin, Le Triomphant, and L'Indomptable achieved speeds between 41.4 and 44.3 knots. The entire class exceeded every destroyer afloat by margins ranging from 3 to 7 knots. This was not measurement error or favorable conditions. This was engineering superiority. The French had built destroyers that redefined what destroyers could achieve. The story begins in 1930, when the Marine Nationale identified a requirement for large, fast destroyers capable of countering Italian cruisers. Italian naval doctrine emphasized fast light cruisers for commerce raiding and cruiser warfare. The Condottieri-class light cruisers displaced 5,000 tons and were designed for speeds exceeding 38 knots. Italian planning documents proposed using these cruisers to intercept French convoys and destroy French destroyer flotillas. The French contre-torpilleurs, destroyer leaders that preceded the Le Fantasque class, could achieve 36 knots maximum. This was insufficient to catch Italian cruisers that were fleeing or escape Italian cruisers that were pursuing. The Marine Nationale specified new contre-torpilleurs capable of 40 knots sustained speed with heavy gun armament and long-range torpedoes. The ships would be large enough to fight in Atlantic weather but fast enough to catch anything smaller than a battleship. They would mount 5.4-inch guns, the largest caliber practical for destroyer mountings. They would carry triple torpedo tube mountings firing the new ML 1923 DT torpedo. They would have endurance exceeding 2,700 nautical miles. 6 ships were ordered under the 1930 naval program: Le Fantasque, Le Terrible, L'Audacieux, Le Malin, Le Triomphant, and L'Indomptable. Design work focused on achieving maximum speed without sacrificing seaworthiness. The hull form was refined through extensive tank testing. The underwater shape minimized resistance. The length-to-beam ratio was 11:1, higher than typical destroyers, which used ratios of 9 or 10:1. The longer, narrower hull reduced wave-making resistance at high speeds. The bow was raked sharply to improve seakeeping. The stern was designed with fine lines that reduced turbulence behind the propellers. The result was a hull optimized for speed in all conditions. The machinery was the most powerful installed in any destroyer to that date. 4 water tube boilers operated at 27 atmospheres pressure and 350 degrees Celsius. This was high-pressure steam, but not extreme by contemporary standards. The key was boiler efficiency and the quality of steam delivered to the turbines. The boilers were positioned amidships. The turbines were positioned aft. This arrangement concentrated weight and improved stability. 2 turbine sets drove 2 propeller shafts. The turbines were geared to allow optimal RPM for both the turbines and propellers. Design output was 74,000 shaft horsepower. This would produce 37 knots. The ships routinely exceeded this by 20 to 30%. Standard displacement was 2,569 tons, Full load displacement was 3,417 tons. This violated the London Naval Treaty limit of 1,850 tons, standard for destroyers. But France had not signed that specific provision. The Washington Treaty allowed France exemptions based on its colonial empire requiring long-range vessels. The Marine Nationale classified the ships as contre-torpilleurs, not destroyers. The distinction was semantic but provided political cover. The ships were destroyers in function regardless of designation. The main armament consisted of 5 canons de 138, 6 mm modèle 1929 guns. The caliber was 138, 6 mm or 5.46 inches. The guns were mounted in single shielded mounts rather than turrets. Weight reduction was critical. Turrets were heavy. Single mounts were lighter and simpler. The layout was 1 super-firing pair forward, 1 gun amidships, and 1 super-firing pair aft. This provided 3-gun salvo forward or aft and 4-gun broadside. The guns fired 45.3 kilogram shells to ranges exceeding 25,000 meters. Rate of fire was 6 rounds per minute sustained. A 5-gun salvo delivered 226.5 kilograms of shell every 10 seconds. This firepower exceeded most contemporary destroyers, which fired lighter shells at slower rates. Fire control was advanced. An electromechanical computer-processed range, bearing, target course, and target speed. The director mounted on the bridge superstructure had a 5-meter stereoscopic rangefinder. The system could engage targets at maximum gun range with acceptable accuracy. The French claimed hit probabilities exceeding 15% at 20,000 meters. British tests suggested this was optimistic, but acknowledged the system was effective. The combination of heavy guns and advanced fire control gave the Fantasque class capability to engage light cruisers on reasonable terms. Torpedo armament was substantial, 955 mm tubes in 3 triple mounts, 1 mount forward between the funnels, 2 mounts aft on either beam. The Naval 1923 DT torpedo carried a 415 kilogram warhead and could be set for 39 knots over 9,000 meters or 35 knots over 13,000 meters. The torpedoes were designed for long-range attacks against capital ships. The combination of gun and torpedo armament created versatile platforms capable of multiple combat roles. Anti-aircraft armament was inadequate by later standards. 237 mm guns and 4 13.2 mm machine guns provided minimal defense. The emphasis was surface combat. Air threat was not prioritized during design. This would prove problematic. Most Fantasque class losses resulted from air attack. But in 1930, designers believed speed was adequate defense. Destroyers moving at 40 knots would be difficult targets for level bombers. This assumption held until dive bombers and torpedo bombers demonstrated that fast surface vessels were vulnerable to air attack regardless of speed. Construction began in 1931 at multiple yards. Chantier de la Loire built le Fantasque, le Terrible, and l'Indomptable. Chantiers et Ateliers de Saint-Nazaire-Penhoel built le Malin and l'Audacieux. Forges et Chantiers de la Méditerranée built le Triomphant. The ships were launched between November 1933 and May 1934. Commissioning occurred between February 1935 and May 1936. The construction schedule was extended by machinery problems. Several ships experienced turbine blade failures during trials. The blades were operating at limits of contemporary metallurgy. Heat and stress caused failures. Replacement blades were manufactured with improved materials. The problem was resolved but delayed service entry. Operational deployment began in 1936. The ships were organized into the 8th and 10th Light Divisions assigned to the 2nd Light Squadron, based at Brest. They conducted exercises and training throughout the late 1930s. The ships proved their capabilities repeatedly. During fleet exercises in 1937, Le Terrible intercepted a simulated enemy force at ranges exceeding 200 nautical miles. She maintained 38 knots for 6 hours. This endurance at high speed exceeded what any other destroyer could achieve. The exercises demonstrated that the Fantasque class could operate as independent raiders or fast scouts for capital ships. When war was declared on September 3, 1939, all 6 ships were assigned to force a raid. The fast-striking force tasked with hunting German commerce raiders. The force included battlecruiser Strasbourg, battleship Dunkirk, and aircraft carrier Bern. The Fantasque class destroyers provided screening and scouting. Their speed allowed them to investigate contacts beyond the range of conventional destroyers. Between September 1939 and April 1940, the force conducted multiple sweeps across the Atlantic searching for German raiders. No contacts were made. German surface raiders were rare and avoided contact with superior forces. On May 10, 1940, Germany invaded France. By June, France had fallen. The armistice divided the French fleet. Ships in British-controlled ports were seized. Ships in French ports came under Vichy government control. Le Terrible was at Mers el-Kebir in Algeria when the British attacked on July 3, 1940. The attack was designed to prevent the French fleet from falling into German hands. Le Terrible was damaged by near-miss bombs but escaped to Toulon. Le Triomphant was seized at Plymouth and eventually joined Free French forces. L'Audacieux was damaged at Dakar in September 1940 during an Anglo-Free French attempt to capture the base. She was towed to Bizerte and sunk by Allied bombers in May 1943 while under repair. L'Indomptable remained at Toulon throughout 1941 and 1942. When Germany occupied Vichy France in November 1942, the French fleet at Toulon scuttled itself to prevent capture. L'Indomptable was among the ships destroyed. Le Malin participated in the naval battle of Casablanca in November 1942. She was damaged by gunfire from American cruisers but survived. After the battle, Morocco joined the Allies. Le Malin, Le Terrible, and Le Fantasque transferred to Allied control. The three surviving ships were refitted in the United States during early 1943. The work occurred at Boston Navy Yard. American radar and sonar were installed. Anti-aircraft armament was upgraded with Beaufort's 40mm and Oerlikon 20mm guns. Aft torpedo tubes were removed to improve stability. The refits added approximately 410 tons displacement. Despite this, Le Fantasque achieved 39.5 knots during trials in mid-1943. The ships were reclassified as light cruisers by the United States Navy because their displacement exceeded destroyer limits. The French continued to designate them as contre-torpilleurs. The ships operated in the Mediterranean throughout 1944. They conducted anti-shipping raids along the Italian coast. On March 18, 1944, Le Fantasque and Le Terrible encountered a German convoy near Genoa. They sank 2 Seabull ferries and damaged 2 others. Both ships were hit by return fire, but damage was minor. On June 17, the ships sank the tanker Giuliana. On August 15, they provided gunfire support for Operation Dragoon. The Allied invasion of southern France. Le Fantasque fired 280 shells from her main guns, supporting the landings. In December 1944, Le Terrible collided with Le Malin during night operations. Both ships were damaged. Le Terrible required repairs that lasted through the war's end. Le Malin returned to service in early 1945. Le Fantasque continued operations until Germany surrendered in May 1945. The 3 surviving ships remained in service post-war. Le Fantasque was sent to French Indochina in late 1945 to support French forces there. She returned in mid-1946 and was placed in reserve. She was stricken in 1953 and scrapped in 1958. Le Terrible underwent modernization in 1952 and 1953 to serve as aircraft carrier escort. She was stricken in 1962 and scrapped in 1963. Le Malin served into the 1950s and was scrapped in 1964. The strategic assessment is that the Le Fantasque class was technically impressive, but operationally underutilized. The ships were designed to hunt Italian cruisers. Opportunities for such engagements were rare. Italian cruisers avoided contact when possible. When engagements occurred, Italian cruisers were supported by superior forces. The Le Fantasque destroyers could not engage heavy cruisers or battleships. Their speed advantage was tactical but not strategically decisive. They spent most of the war on convoy escort, patrol, and gunfire support missions. These missions did not exploit their unique capabilities. The speed record set by Le Terrible stood until 2007 when a civilian hydrofoil exceeded 45 knots. But Le Terrible's record was for conventionally hulled displacement vessels. No destroyer or cruiser has exceeded her speed under sustained operations. Modern warships prioritize other capabilities. Speed above 35 knots is considered unnecessary. Propulsion systems emphasize efficiency over maximum speed. The era of extremely fast surface combatants ended with the Le Fantasque class. The British studied the class extensively during the 1930s and again after the war when they operated captured vessels. The Admiralty concluded that achieving such speeds required trade-offs Britain was unwilling to make. The ships were lightly armored. They were vulnerable to air attack. Their endurance was adequate for Mediterranean operations, but marginal for Atlantic operations. The machinery was complex and required skilled maintenance. British destroyer doctrine emphasized reliability and versatility over specialized capabilities. The Fantasque class represented a different philosophy. Extreme performance in specific roles justified compromises in others. The American Navy reached similar conclusions. Speed above 35 knots was expensive in terms of machinery weight, fuel consumption, and maintenance. American destroyers prioritized anti-aircraft capability and anti-submarine capability over surface speed. The 5-inch 38 caliber dual-purpose gun was considered optimal for American requirements. The Fantasque class mounted larger guns that were effective against surface targets but could not engage aircraft effectively. American doctrine made different trade-offs than French doctrine. This is the Fantasque story. 6 ships, ordered 1930, commissioned 1935 to 1936, designed to catch Italian cruisers at 40 knots, achieved 45 knots on trials, 132.4 meters long, 3,417 tons full load, 5.4-inch guns, 9 torpedo tubes, world speed record holder for 72 years. 3 lost during the war. 3 scrapped in the 1950s and 1960s. The fastest destroyers ever built. The ships that proved speed was achievable but not necessarily useful. The contre-torpilleurs that redefined destroyer capabilities and demonstrated that extreme performance requires extreme compromises. They were fast, impressively fast, faster than anything before or since. But speed alone does not win wars. That was the lesson. Speed gets you to the fight. Fighting wins the fight. The Fantasque class could get anywhere quickly. But once there, they were destroyers fighting cruisers, or destroyers escorting convoys, or destroyers bombarding beaches. Fast destroyers performing standard destroyer missions. The speed was spectacular. The missions were ordinary. That is the paradox. The fastest ships doing routine work. The record holders relegated to escort duty. The technological achievement overshadowed by strategic irrelevance. This was Fantasque, the fastest ship in the West that spent the war doing what slower ships could have done almost as well.